Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be talking about immortality today. And I'm probably going to be lecturing for about 2 hours in total. And so the first 2 hours are going to be here live publicly. And then the last little bit is a Q&A. And that's going to take place on my website. So if any kind of questions come up, or you want to go deeper into this topic, you can sign up there and have your questions answered there. All right, so the reason why we are getting into immortality today is because it's probably the single most important topic for us to understand. Because no matter the mystery tradition, whether it be Eastern or Western, it obviously takes a big part of Christianity and esoteric Christianity, this idea of eternal life and immortality. No matter the mystery tradition, immortality or the establishment of your immortal body is central in initiation. It's actually the reason why human beings incarnate. The reason why human beings actually take a life on the earth in the material plane is so that we can transubstantiate or transform our material body, our etheric body, and our astral body into a higher glorified body and essentially live as an immortal being. So every single mystery school, every single initiation teaching is essentially about immortality. That's the whole goal. However, when we look at immortality in society, we see some really strange and bizarre things that come up. We see, the idea that to become immortal, it's not a spiritual process of transformation, of transubstantiation. We're now seeing that immortality is basically some kind of life extension technologies that are completely physical. This life extension is completely rooted in the material plane. It's a backwards ideology, whether it be transhumanism or even some kinds of medical science can be like this as well. And so deep down in our hearts, we know that we are to basically become completely integrated, immortal beings. We know that in our heart. And this impulse is creating this backwards, kind of backwards creation of it, a synthetic creation of it. And we have to be able to discern which is which. Okay. So I'm also going to be addressing, I was doing a live Q&A on YouTube, I think it was a couple months ago, and we were talking about basically, I think it was the immortal body, resurrection, and there was a bunch of comments underneath, and I want to address some of those sort of myths or misunderstandings around resurrection that appeared from my last lecture and from some Q&As. And then we're also going to get into this idea of an American Renaissance, or this idea of what is sometimes being called New America. And we're going to get into how we can get into that, what is being called New America, or this America rebirth, or this world of rebirth, but do that in a spiritual way, not in this materialistic, externalist way that's harmful to you. We want to direct human evolution in a healthy way that acknowledges the spiritual reality of you as a human being, not in a materialist, externalist way that actually harms your energy body and that harms you. And right now we're at a precipice where we can go two different ways. We can go into a very healthy rebirth, or we can go down a very dark path of basically synthetic spirituality. Okay? All right, so we're going to, I guess, go a little bit into my prior lecture that I did, which is called The Immortal Body, just so that we understand exactly what it is for this lecture. So, what is eternal life? What is immortality? Eternal life specifically is the transubstantiation of the material human form into a spiritual form that is not subject to death nor reincarnation in the material world. So when we talk about eternal life, someone who has achieved eternal life, achieved immortality, or has achieved resurrection, that is somebody who no longer has to incarnate in the material world. They've mastered the material plane to varying different degrees, and they're operating really in a whole different kind of system than the normal human being who has not established their mortal body. And as I mentioned, every single, serious religion has acknowledged this, at least in its esoteric aspect. So in the East, the immortal body is called the diamond body. It's called the Vajra body. It's the spiritual masters who had achieved this were often called immortals. I think they were also called sometimes cloud walkers. All these different names for the individuals within that stream that had achieved it. It's also called the light body, and that's probably the most common term in the New Age. It's this idea of like your light body. But here, light body is not just like your astral body or your etheric body. It's literally, in this context, it is a completely catalyzed, eternal energy body that you basically live in, that is not subject to death or reincarnation anymore. It's also associated, especially in Tibetan mysticism, with the establishment of the rainbow body, which happens just before somebody has achieved resurrection, okay? And this is why also in the Western tradition, you can see sometimes pictures of Jesus Christ, and he has this rainbow around him. So there's nothing that exists really in the Western tradition that the Eastern doesn't have, and vice versa. It's just sort of where consciousness is at the time, basically. And in the Eastern tradition, how we actually get off of the wheel of samsara, or the wheel of incarnation, the wheel of Maya and illusion, is through establishing your resurrection body, is through actually achieving resurrection. So that's where the East and West meet, is they have the same principles in many ways at their foundation. They're just going at it a different way based on where human consciousness is at the time. Now, in the West, you have the immortal body being called the resurrection body. It is also called the glorified phantom. It is also called, it's also called the glorified etheric body as well. And in the West, the real esoteric teachings of the immortal body became so dangerous to these different figures who were extremely dogmatic, these different leaders who were very dogmatic, that it had to be cloaked in the practice of alchemy. So when you look at the alchemists, they're talking about transforming metals, and there's a truth to that. But really the idea of the philosopher's stone and the transference of one form to another, the transubstantiation of lead to gold, what that really is talking about is actually the material body and the sort of unrefined etheric body and the unrefined astral body being integrated through the Christ essence within you, the immortal essence within you, and creating this body. Okay, that's what alchemy really represents. So the individuals who were part of the stream who had done this, people who had become immortal, so to speak, these were called sun heroes, and they were associated with the sun because the sun is actually the Christ being. It's the great macrocosmic entity that we all live within. And so when you look at the idea of, say, Apollo, or the different figures in the past who were sun initiates or sun heroes, right? These were individuals that were within this capacity to varying degrees. That's why you see them crucified. The different sun heroes always appear the same way, just as Jesus did. They do the same rites, and they are subject to the same forces. That's why you see these different sun heroes crucified across different traditions. That's why you see the same symbology being used over and over again, is because it is a ritual, and it is the sun ritual, and it's also Christos in Greek, and it's also in the Eastern tradition. Someone at the very high level of being able to do this would be called a Buddha, right? So, or a master, like a spiritual master in the New Age is basically a Buddha, maybe a Bodhisattva. It's a sun hero, basically. So this idea of immortality exists in all traditions using the same symbology, but different figures, okay? So how exactly is immortality achieved? If this is the most important thing that we're supposed to do in our life, literally nothing is more important. It's a joke to think about like, oh my God, I have to own this car, or I have to have this, material thing. That's a joke. The reason why you come here is literally to become eternal and to integrate all of your pain, all of your trauma, all of your refined energy in your energy body and in your physical body, to transubstantiate that literally to an immortal form that your higher self just eventually operates within, and you no longer have to incarnate anymore. But so many people get so entrenched in material life, and it completely controls them. The idea of money controls them. The idea of fame and status controls them. And in their life, they end up transubstantiating very little of their actual lower essences into a higher essence that's eternal. And so this is why people have to go around, and around again into reincarnation, is because reincarnation stops and you get to a whole different level of development when you build your resurrection body. Okay, that's the whole point. And this is only done through spiritual development. And the exact way in which it's done, to be very specific, is you have a higher self, right? In anthroposophy, the higher self is called the I, capital I. And so the I and the higher self are the same thing. Now, the I is outside of you. Your higher self is technically, it's part of you, but it's sort of outside of your being, meaning that you're not your complete form, right? And it hovers technically sort of outside, and it's always trying to work its way in through drawing you into it, which actually needs you to heal yourself to fully embody. So the I, it glorifies the astral body, it glorifies the etheric body, and eventually the physical body. So it's really your higher self, or your I, which is united with the Christ essence in the cosmos, that basically transforms all of your energy bodies and eventually even your physical form into a spiritual form. Okay, that's the goal. So all of your lower urges, all of your attachments to the material world, all of your pain, all of your trauma has to be over time loosened and released as you give yourself to God, and your higher self eventually works its way through transforming all of you into an immortal form, okay? So that's how it happens. You have to work for it. Okay. The other thing that I think is not often mentioned when it comes to teachings around the immortal body is that the human body and the earth and the sun and this entire process of evolution I'm talking about, they're all united. The earth, the human body, and the sun. If any one of those things are made inorganic or tampered with, so that they're not freely absorbed and freely worked with within our life, that process of immortality becomes very, very difficult, okay? So for example, if you were to leave the earth, you're not going to build your immortal body. If you want to leave your earth and leave the earth and live on another planet or something like that, you can go explore, but we are part of the earth. We are made of the earth, and we are part of the sun. And there's an intimate process, as we're going to see in this lecture today, of transforming ourselves with the earth through the sun and with the sun. So the earth, the human form, and the sun are inextricably linked. There's no separation of them that ever should occur, even if we're able to develop the technology to do so. To do that is to basically shoot ourselves in the legs in regards to establishing the immortal body. Okay, so in this way, as you'll see at the end of this lecture, there's the next level of earthly development, which is called New Jerusalem or New Jupiter in the anthroposophical system, and that is basically a glorified eternal form. The human body has that same form that is basically an eternal etheric body. And the sun is basically, and the Christ within the sun is what creates that for us. So we have a very succinct process that we have to go through that involves earth, sun, and man. Okay? So eternal life or immortality is found in every mystery tradition. Achieving resurrection or eternal life is the overall purpose of all initiation systems, and all mystery traditions' goal is to help humanity achieve this. Becoming immortal refers to the establishment of a glorified spiritual body and the cessation of material incarnation. Okay? This would bring man up to like a angel level and higher up into the spiritual hierarchies as well, if you are to view the spiritual hierarchies distinctly as an initiation ladder. This human process of evolution and transcendence is united with the planet and humanity. As humanity spiritualizes into a glorified etheric form, we do so with our earth, with the assistance of our sun. We can't remove or change any of the processes. Okay, we can't play God. Okay, it's about harmonization with the earth and the sun. We're bound together in a system, an esoteric system with our sun and the earth. Humanity's evolution is inextricably tied cosmically to these bodies. Because the Christ essence or our I, our higher self is basically united with the sun, with the Christ essence. And the Christ is the keeper of our higher self. The Christ being is the keeper of our I until we're able to fully become it. And that is the sun. And the earth is basically what our body is made out of. And so they're always working upon us at all times. And we are transforming the earth. And we're also working upon the sun in a succinct system of evolution that are the very essence of our being is made out of these forces, right? The I is united with the Christ, and our physical form is united with the earth. So we have to consciously be able to develop with that in mind. So when I was talking about resurrection and eternal life in a live Q&A, one of the most popular comments was saying that we are already eternal beings, that we already have eternal life. So why talk about immortality, eternality, if we are already eternal? And this comment is based on the assumption that just because you have an astral body, just because you have an etheric body that are spiritual bodies, that automatically means you exist forever. So that's actually not what eternal life means. That's actually not what immortality refers to in the occult or in spiritual science. Immortality is not generally referring to the fact that you have a spiritual body and that you reincarnate, right? Immortality is actually talking about something that you achieve through the integration of all of your bodies into one higher body. Okay, so immortality and eternal life in Christianity is a process that we have to achieve through healing ourselves, through attuning with God, through doing good works, life after life. It's not something that's guaranteed for us. Okay, we're not guaranteed that. All right, we have to develop it. And our astral body, right, is also called the desire body in the Eastern traditions. And if you clairvoyantly look at the astral body, it's full of basically impulses. Some of these impulses are higher impulses that have been glorified, that are there because you have overcome bad habits, because you've overcome very difficult things in your life. That is seen on your astral body. That's seen on your etheric body as an achievement that makes a mark on you. But there's also a lot of stuff in our astral body that is lower impulses, that stem from an animal part of us, that stem from selfishness, that stem from greed, that stem from fear. And these impulses also charge through us. And so when all of those are clarified and purged, and when we fully unite with God in our heart, then all of those impulses are gone, and that's what crystallizes essentially our resurrection body. So you have to earn it. It's not just guaranteed to you, and you certainly cannot create it with a machine. Okay, because the creation of immortality in the human being is directly associated with you looking at yourself and you being honest about, am I being fearful here? Am I being judgmental? Am I being cruel? That and overcoming these impulses and becoming a moral person. Morality is directly associated with immortality. So there's no way to establish any kind of real immortality through any external means, because it depends on you actually, through an alchemical process of healing, developing this body. Okay? So eternal life or immortality is not just referring to simply having a higher self, right? It's not simply referring to, oh, you have a spiritual body. Because you have a spiritual body, you're eternal. No. Eternal life and immortality is not referring to that. Okay. All right. Some of the realities here of genuine eternal life are that you basically are required to release all of your attachments to the material plane, life after life after life. So, being liked doesn't control you. Money, status, this kind of stuff, or you're not super fearful. You have to put your faith in God and live a life of connection with Him. And that is what develops it. So you can't develop your body really unless you begin to switch your focus from being completely anchored in a materialist life where you only acknowledge the material world and seek to just kind of cannibalize all the time. You really have to connect to something higher and live in a higher way. Okay? So, you also have to, and this is what I think also gets lost a lot when talking about immortality and the building of a higher body, you also have to some degree, understand the spiritual hierarchies. So you have to understand the angelic hierarchies, you have to understand spiritual masters, or, the Buddhas, the saints. You have to understand the system of human initiation, because you actually can't establish your mortal body unless you have reverence for beings higher than yourself. And so the big trend in modern spirituality and philosophy is to place yourself as a god, as though you're some kind of god controlling the simulation, controlling the machine cosmos. Well, this is another materialistic form of occult materialism. Because in order to actually develop your higher body, you have to have an acknowledgement of spiritual beings greater than yourself, because you have to have some context as to who you are and where you are in that initiation process. And you cannot do that if you're constantly placing yourself at the center of the cosmos. It's not possible, right? That's a Luciferic way of living. So you have to acknowledge the process of spiritual initiation in the cosmos. You have to acknowledge that. And this is something that back in earlier civilizations, we all knew. You know, we could see clairvoyantly our auras and the markings on our aura to see who was a great initiated and who wasn't, and there was a different way of being. But now we don't have that clairvoyance, and so we have to intellectually understand what initiation science is, what an angel is, what a master is, because this is the world that we're going into if we want to achieve mastership ourself, angelship ourself. Okay, so, and also how you actually, when it comes down to really actually how you receive the robe of immortality, it's actually from a being higher than yourself. It's actually passed down to you. Okay, and this is called spiritual economy in Rudolf Steiner's work, spiritual economy. So every individual that becomes an immortal, they're actually partly receiving a robe from a master or a being higher than themselves. It's an exchange. So there's a spiritual economy that happens as well. And in order to participate in that, you have to know what that system is, right? And as I mentioned, you have to attune your will with God's will. Not what you want, not your lower ego, your lower I, but you have to operate from a higher center, from God within you, okay? And it requires you to heal yourself, and you no longer have to incarnate into the material world. So simply having an energy body or higher self, okay, as part of our spiritual anatomy does not mean that you're eternal, okay? It's actually the synthesis of these bodies through spiritual development that creates an immortal body, all right? So eternality happens in the human being when they can become fully integrated, healed, and attuned with God, which creates an immortal body. Your personal healing, reverence for God, and mortality, and literally creates an immortal form for you to operate in. We must earn our immortal body through right living and a direct personal development and spiritual awareness. Okay, so now that we have that down, let's get into basically what happens when we die. Because I think that perhaps in modern spirituality or the New Age, I think that the things like the death process or the spiritual hierarchies or these different complex teachings in spiritual science, I think they get really dumbed down. I think they get really fragmented, and I think that the trend in society is that people come into spirituality and they think, okay, I'm going to believe whatever spiritual ideas make me feel good, or I'm going to believe whatever spiritual ideas validate my already existing opinions, which is fine to a degree. But eventually, we all have to look for the objective truth of the spiritual world. What genuinely happens when we die? What is the exact process of establishing an immortal body? You know, what are the spiritual hierarchies exactly? What is a planet exactly? It has to become a precise spiritual science for us to enter into it in any meaningful or productive way. So, what's the difference between mortality and immortality, or what happens at the death process that would make somebody keep having to come back and reincarnate again and again? What's going on there that immortal individuals die in a different way, and mortals, mere mortals like us, you know, we die in a different way? And so the death process and observing and understanding the death process actually lets us know a great deal about spirituality, okay? So let's go very, very, very deeply into the death process. Okay? So when we die, what really sticks out as the difference between someone who has to reincarnate again and again still and somebody who is more on the path to immortality is actually how the elemental forces in their form are alchemized upon death, or how they dissipate and separate upon death. Okay, so upon death, what happens is your higher self, or your I, basically separates from your material body, your physical body, and your physical body becomes basically like a shell. It also then separates from the etheric body, and the etheric body also hangs around the physical body like a shell. Now, if you were with me a few months ago during my lecture called The Mystery of Death, we went very deeply into this. And, you know, when the etheric body is sort of hanging around the physical body, that's called a wraith or an eidolon. A wraith or an eidolon. And so it's sort of like there's this etheric and physical world that's kind of associated with the eighth sphere, and it's where all of this kind of material remains. We're very connected to the earth. So once your I, your higher self, is separated from your physical form, and that's a shell, and then also separated from your etheric form, that's a shell, it then retreats into the heavenly cosmos, okay, the starry spheres, and it is, or the astral world, if you will. And it begins to pass through heaven, okay? Now, when somebody is still on the path of reincarnation, what ends up happening during their death process is that during that period when the higher self or the I is separating from the physical and etheric bodies, there's a kind of alchemical process that's going on with the elemental forces in their form. Now, some elemental forces are liberated or freed. And when a elemental that is part of your being, because we all have to have elementals that come together and create our form, right? So we're beings within beings within beings. That's how the cosmos is properly observed. So when we heal ourselves, you know, when we're attuned to God, you know, we actually end up liberating and freeing the elemental beings that make up our form. So when we pass away, they're like, yippee, and they go off and they get to go into a different level of development, just like how Christ is the being through Jesus who liberated humanity by depositing the Christ essence in our being and in the earth. We are doing that same process for the elemental beings inside of us. It is the same formula in a different way. Okay, that's why understanding initiation science and spiritual science is important, because we can now see and understand all of these very important processes. Okay, so some of the elementals are liberated. They're like, Yahoo, we are released. Okay, there's other elementals that are not liberated. And these elementals essentially make up the part of our form that is unhealed. These are the lower impulses that we've been unable to transcend. It's all of our fear. Those elementals are not liberated, and they stay united with our consciousness, even as our higher self and our I goes off into the heavenly spheres and begins to release the life that we've lived. There's still a part of us, an elemental part of us that's full of our pain, that's full of our trauma, that's full of our lower impulses, that stays united with the earth and blocked by the lunar sphere as well. Okay, so only the most refined part of you goes into the heavenly planes, and it gets more and more refined as it moves through the different levels of heaven, which are also the different planetary spheres. Okay? So the elemental forces that are not liberated, they fall back down into the earth and they wait. And when your soul comes back around, it actually moves through heaven, passes back around. And when you incarnate again, you actually pick up those same elemental beings. And that becomes part of your body. That becomes part of your essence, part of your being. So that is the spiritual scientific definition of basically karma, of why we have the same impulses life after life. Okay? And how the goal really is not only to create an immortal body in which we can exist eternally, no longer having to incarnate, but part of our purpose is also to liberate these beings in which we use to make up our very form. And they come to the Christ essence through us. Okay? Does that make sense? So that's the difference between somebody who has reached a level of immortality. You know, when they pass away, there's basically no more of that elemental lower essence left. And when they pass away, basically their I separates out like normal, but their I goes into an immortal body that's created for them, that they've created for themselves. So as they're separating out, they already have a body established that they're operating in. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So when we die, our higher self separates from our physical and etheric bodies and retreats into the spiritual world or the astral plane. Our physical body is left as a shell and decays. While the etheric body lingers around the body for a time, it also eventually dissolves as well. During this process, elemental beings that make up your form go through a process of separation or an alchemical distillation. Remember the alchemists that were disguising the establishment of the immortal body in the process of alchemy, right? The elemental beings that are united with the unhealed parts of your consciousness remain with the earth, while the elemental beings that are united with the parts of you that you have healed are set free. Okay? Some elemental beings that make up your earthly being are released or liberated, and others remain behind for you to pick up again and hopefully liberate them in your next several lives. And again, when you reincarnate on the earth, you take up the same elemental forces you did last time, which is why you have the same impulses unless you've healed them. All right. And I want to just mention here, because Christianity, the original Christian stream included reincarnation, and it was removed. And reincarnation was removed for 2,000 years. It was to be removed for 2,000 years from the Christian doctrine. This is according to the anthroposophical system. The reason why it was removed was because humanity had to basically really focus on themselves personally as individuals, as an I am. And we were coming off of all of this earlier period, which was quite frankly the opposite of personal focus. It was all about releasing yourself into the cosmos. When you did any spiritual work, it was about getting out of Maya, getting out of physicality, getting out of the physical world and returning to spirit. It was about disassociation initially, and a kind of spirituality through separating from the material world, which they believed was Maya. And also we operated more in a hive mind. We operated more in a tribal way. And so now the task is to become an individual, to individuate, as Carl Jung says. And so we needed to let go of the doctrine of reincarnation so we weren't constantly belittling our current life and daydreaming and focusing on the plurality of things. We needed to focus on the singularity, our life, and come very, very deeply, deeply into our body and experience total embodiment of the individual, which we cannot do as a process if we're disassociating all the time, or we're wanting to leave the world because it's Maya and go into the spiritual world. And this is how we develop, is we're exposed to sort of one way of spiritually existing, and then it shifts, and then that's how we develop. And so for those that think that reincarnation was not part of original Christianity, it actually is, but it was removed so that the focus could be on the individual, which is what was called for at the time. And different, religious systems will do that. You can look at any religious system and you're going to find that certain doctrines were removed to encourage certain development, and then they're put back in, and that's actually the arc of human spirituality. Okay. So a couple little extra tidbits is also that the more that the individual establishes their immortal body, the more psychic you become, the more you gain higher awareness, the more the more permeable you become to the spiritual world. So developing psychic abilities is directly connected to morality and the development of the immortal body, actually. And in the cosmic system of initiation, the level that's really associated with having a glorified etheric body, which we would recognize as the resurrection body, that is in what is called the Venus stage of development. So there's different stages of human initiation that are directly associated with the different levels of heaven. And the different levels of heaven are actually delineated by the planetary spheres. So somebody who has achieved this is associated with Venus development, or they're associated with Buddhaship in the East. This is the level of initiation. Those are the mystery terminologies. That's the cosmic terminology for that level of initiation. All right. So that is sort of a very quick discussion about the immortal body and the importance of it. Now we're going to get into really the different sort of inversions of this process. So the issue with dealing with a spiritual topic is that we're kind of in a catch-22 where, in order to really understand spirituality, you have to sort of develop the perception of the spiritual world. You have to develop your senses, your higher senses, to perceive the spiritual world. So we're kind of in this really precarious position in society where it's imperative now that we rise out of materialism, scientific materialism, and begin to return to essentially understanding the spiritual world with the same kind of scientific understanding as we would the natural world. And we have to return to acknowledging that we are spiritual beings. As a person, you can think all day long that the spiritual world doesn't exist, that you don't have an astral body, that you don't have an etheric body, that you don't have a Christed I. that is constantly speaking to you and working upon you, a higher self. You can think that all day long, but it doesn't change a darn thing. You are a spiritual being. You are a spiritual human being. It doesn't matter whether we acknowledge it or not. That's the reality of what we are. All that happens when we develop a hyper-materialistic perspective is we end up trying to engage with spiritual ideas like immortality, right? And we create these inversions. We create these materialistic attempts at immortality because deep down in our heart, we know that we should be immortal. We know that we should live forever. That's deep down in the core of our being. It's why we come here. So deep down we have this longing, we know, but when the mind is too entrenched in materialism and the higher senses aren't even beginning to develop, inversions begin to be created on the planet. People begin to create false versions of immortality to meet that desire that we all have. That desire is really spiritual development. That's what we're really craving, but it gets turned into technological development or weird stuff with eugenics, weird kind of medical experimental science that is not harmonious with spiritual life or your spiritual bodies. It harms your spiritual bodies. That's the ironic thing. People think that, oh, I'm going to live forever through transhumanism. Oh, I'm going to live forever through this medical, through changing my genes and stuff like that. You're actually completely harming yourself and making it so your spiritual bodies can no longer properly communicate and nourish your physical body. You're actually harming yourself. That's the weird irony for all of this. Okay, so establishing immortality is fundamentally an internal process. It involves the individual having to turn inward. In the most mundane sense, it is turning inward and humbling yourself to the reality that you've got things to heal. I've got things to heal. We have things to heal. And that's okay. We're not perfect. We're not supposed to be. But we each have things that we need to transcend. And we can only do that by going inward. Once we begin to do that, we find it easier and easier to connect with God. The more unhealed we are, the more of our shadow we refuse to look at, the more susceptible we are to dark entities. This is the sad reality, is that our existence demands progress. It demands evolution. Evolution is law. Development is law. And so the more that we refuse to go inward, the more that we refuse to heal ourselves, take a good look at ourselves, at our shadow, over time, the more susceptible we are to interference from dark entities and basically problems. Our health directly depends on our inner work. And more, there's incredible practitioners and individuals that are speaking about how the physical form is really the last place in which our spiritual maladies and emotional issues and psychological issues materialize. And so the real way to heal is always inward. The real way to develop is always through the inside, which then creates a radiance in the world that leads to higher developments. It creates creativity. It comes back and creates advancement. But when someone cannot turn inward, they project that desire to achieve immortality into external processes and eventually try to enter into these external processes of immortality. Instead of going inward, they try to eventually project into technology because they don't understand what real immortality is. Okay, it's any inversion is also death. When you have a truth that becomes inverted, you're working with the death impulse and you're working with a death cult. There's no way around it. There is life, and the etheric body is called life spirit. That is life. That is Christ. That is the way. And that must be developed. So when the etheric body becomes damaged and tries to be controlled by technology, that is death. And that is not the way. And that is Ahriman, or Antichrist. It's very simple. It's not complicated at all. Okay? So this also goes for eugenics, trying to control humanity, trying to control genes, control their children's development in this kind of weird Gattaca society. The same kind of thing. Gene splicing, all kinds of unnatural manipulations of the form that go too much into controlling the form using science and technology, whether it be medical technology or actual chips or little things like transhumanistic stuff. All of that works against the life body. It drains the life body. It does the exact opposite, okay? So that is a very unhealthy inversion, okay? The desire to live eternally and re-merge with the spiritual hierarchies and consciously ascend to heaven as a completely conscious being is what we all crave. I mean, we descended from the spiritual world into matter, into the earth to learn, to be separated, and to feel alone and dark and cold, and to forget who we are, to forget our true destiny, to forget that we're spiritual, to forget that we're part of the spiritual hierarchies. We came here to do that, and that involved becoming a material form on the earth. But our destiny is to return to the spiritual world that we came from, that we fell from. That's completing the arc. And so that desire is so strong in us. But, you know, creating these false versions of it will actually completely prevent that process from happening. And we are now coming into a time where you are going to be sold a rotten bill of goods. You are going to be told all kinds of things about health, about eternality, about how the future is supposed to be. And you're going to have a choice whether you go into basically a lower timeline or a fallen path, or you can navigate through it with your discernment and take the real organic spiritual path, which you're really destined to have, because the synthetic paths, which we're going to talk about now, are false paths. And they're going to be very hypnotic, very seductive, very flashy. But the real test is on the individual to be able to discern. It's really simple. Does that actually cause eternal life, or is this actually a real process that a human being can evolve in, or not? You know, that's the question. Okay, so it doesn't have to be any harder than that. All right, the other inversion, the other kind of synthetic inversion of really immortality and also the death process is the idea of a multi-planetary civilization, or the idea of space colonization, the idea of colonizing Mars or colonizing these different spheres. This is actually a synthetic inversion of death, and it's a synthetic inversion of immortality. Okay, so the part of the death process is a return to heaven, okay? And in esoteric Christianity, there are different heavens. There's like the first heaven, second, third. There was a show called Seventh Heaven, you know. There's these different versions different levels of heaven. And the soul passes through these different levels of heaven and comes back around and then incarnates. And every time you pass through a different layer of heaven, you have to go through some kind of transubstantiation. So the higher planes are not just matter vibrating at a faster rate. Okay? That's not what the higher dimensions are. That's not what heaven is. The higher planes are a different quality. Okay? Not a different rate of vibration. You actually have to have a quality developed within your being, which is life. You actually have to have life or a glorified etheric body, or you have to have that to consciously pass through these different planes. So no machine, by the way, is going to bring you into whatever time you want, all right? You're not going to master time with a machine. Where time comes from is actually the spiritual hierarchies. The time is the aeons, they're beings. And no human being is going to be dominating one of the highest angels that exists. Okay? That's not going to happen. I don't want to get too off limits. We can talk about time travel and technology at a different day. But machines are not going to bring you into the higher dimensions. The higher dimensions is a scientific New Age term for the higher planes, or what would be classically called the different heavens. In the Eastern tradition, they would have been called lokas or bardos. Okay, it's all the same thing using different language. Now, the different levels of heaven, or the different bardos, the different lokas, or the different dimensions, if you will, they are ruled by a different planetary consciousness. This is why when you look at old mystery teachings, they show the soul going up through heaven and going into these different lokas, or these different planetary spheres, or these little planets. Every single planet or dimension or loka or bardo is ruled by a planetary sphere. Okay? And that is determined when you take the Earth, okay, and you use the Ptolemaic system, the Earth upwards. So you have the Earth, and then you have Venus, Mercury, Sun, Mars, and from there on, that's basically where the soul goes through, okay? So part of our death and rebirth process is a cosmic experience. It's actually experiencing life on Venus, life on Mercury, life in the first heaven, life in the second heaven, life in Kamaloka, which is the moon. The moon realm is Kamaloka. It is the purgatorial realm, okay? Every realm of heaven is associated and delineated by the orbit of a planetary sphere. So when you pass away, that's where all the starseed memories come from. That's why people think that they're an incarnation from the Pleiades or an incarnation from Venus or Arcturus. It's because we pass through certain spheres when we die. And then we come back around and we are born on the earth after having gone through these different schools, if you will, on these different planetary spheres. Very popular now in the New Age, but completely classical teaching. You know, Edgar Cayce was talking about this in Planetary Sojourns. He was describing how the soul goes up and it experiences a Jupiter life, it experiences life on Venus, and it takes on certain qualities, the qualities generally associated with the astrological understanding of that sphere. Rudolf Steiner was talking about this 100 years ago. And he said, listen, we have to start to understand the plurality of worlds. We can't, the Michael era, the future era, the age of Aquarius is all about this plurality returning. And we've got to enter into it properly. And what the inversionist will do, the materialist will take that desire to experience other spheres and the knowledge that comes with that, these other civilizations of our own being, And they'll seek to do that on the material plane. It's not possible. Our cosmos is a graveyard. Okay? The material plane is a graveyard. It is the plane of death. It is the lower chamber of the cosmic being. That's what it is. So there's a process, which is the process between death and rebirth, that is a completely cosmic exploration of higher worlds, of different spheres. And when people talk about Mars, of course you're not talking about just the physical planet Mars in the physical plane. You're talking about a planet that goes through the same courses and epochs of development under different conditions and influences as our Earth. So you're looking at a shell of the Mars sphere. Okay, you're looking at a kind of graveyard of it. I'm going to get into Mars a little bit later in this lecture, but I'm just trying to illustrate to you that this idea that we have to colonize space is a desire to return to and understand the process of death and rebirth and what happens in the heavenly realm, for that knowledge and for that experience. And it cannot be achieved through material means. And it's funny because usually people who want to create these multi-planetary civilizations, it's like we have to find life. We have to find this life in the cosmos, as though you're going to discover life essence or life in the material plane. Life is, again, the etheric form. So it's interesting how we achieve immortality through literally developing our life body or our etheric body, or as Rudolf Steiner would say, our life spirit, right? That's how we really become immortal. That's how we achieve immortality. And then the space colonists want to find life. Okay, well, it's internal. It's not, you're not going to find it out there. You will run into situation after situation where it goes wrong, because that's not what is intended for the development of humanity, for all of the reasons I've already given. If people want to go out and discover things and play around and poke around, that's fine. But it becomes a different topic. And it summons different forces within us and outside of us when we start saying our life and immortality depends on becoming multiplanetary. That is where we cut it off. Again, if people want to go out and explore, okay, space or whatever it is, and mine the asteroid or whatever they want to do, that's fine. But as soon as we start associating becoming a multi-planet civilization, colonization with life and the continuation of life, that is a leg, many legs too far, because it denies your spiritual process of resurrection, your spiritual process of eternality, which requires you to be on the earth, connecting with the sun, and it's an inward process, not this external inversion, okay? So, human beings actually can't live on another planet. You know, a human being can't actually live out a full life on the moon or on Mars or on any other planet, because we're not just a material body, and we actually require being in the essence of our mother in order to function. In order to have life function, we require being on the earth. And it is only a materialist consciousness that would not factor in, okay, these spiritual bodies are united with the earth and the sun. And the human being is of the earth and is functioning within the magnetism and the life body of the earth, and how we assimilate energy and evolve is directly associated with how the earth is doing so. We cannot be separated from it. We'll immediately begin to distort and deform and die. Which is why transhumanism often gets brought up again and again, is because the only way you could ever really live in space for long periods of time as if you just become a machine. Which, again, there you go. It's the loss of your humanity and completely damaging yourself. You can't do it. So the other thing I want to say here is getting back to the life body or the etheric body and these inversions, which is that every single human being has a certain amount of life that is in their life body or their etheric body. Okay, remember we have a physical body, we have an etheric body, which is like an assimilation body for spiritual energy, and then we have an astral body and a higher self. Okay, that's the esoteric anatomy of the human being. The etheric body is charged with life. Okay, it's charged with all of your life essence the moment that you're born. You have all of your life essence. And so once that life essence is gone, you pass away. You die. And you want to die because you're going to naturally want to be released back into the higher worlds and go through your process of integration, where you begin to integrate all of your karma, where you begin to reconnect with deceased relatives, where you begin to work with angels, and you begin to be released from the material world, which is actually very difficult on anyone. So we actually don't want to try to extend our life beyond what our etheric body already has within it as kind of the battery of our being, okay? If you do that, you're going to create an inversion in your soul. So you're actually going to start sucking into your being energy that you really don't have. You're going to become like a black hole, basically, energetically, if you try to extend your life beyond what your etheric body is offering to you. Now, this is where we get into immortality and eternal life and the preservation of, you could say, your energy through cycling it through your body wisely. People can and have extended their life and even achieved immortality through living in such a way that they actually generate life essence through deep connection with God. Okay, that's actually how it's done. And that's how the etheric body becomes glorified, radiant, like the sun. It takes nothing and is just radiant. That's the immortal body. Okay, so that's the goal. That's the ideal. So all of these technologies, whether it be transhumanism or weird stuff that is mechanically or scientifically extending your life, you should at least be spiritually aware enough to sense your etheric body to see if that's even going to work. Because all of this stuff about trying to mechanically control our lifespan works against our actual spiritual development. And quite frankly, a lot of trying to create eternal life through weird technologies, medical or machine, is actually rooted in fear. It's actually rooted in the fear of death. It's actually rooted in vanity. It's actually rooted in a desire for control, a need to control yourself, a need to control everything, even when you die. And these are sick things, okay? When you are trying to do anything rooted in fear, anything rooted in vanity, it's not going to go very well, right? So you actually are not going to create anything meaningful if you're trying to just, live forever out of vanity or control issues, right? Real immortality begins when we actually don't really think about those things, right? You're not trying to control and micromanage every little part of your life. Everything that happens to you, you seek to learn from and to enter into with an open heart. And your life becomes something that you enter into, no matter how good or bad, you enter into it with a steady hand, hoping to learn and heal the best that you can. knowing that everything in your life is divinely guided and is there for a reason, good and bad, and that may you become the still quiet sea and have no ripples. And that's how we go through life, with no intense desire and also no intense rejection of anything. And that is the way of the master, right? No intense desire, but also no intense rejections of things. It's to approach everything with that steady hand as something that needs to be integrated, and knowing that you have that power within you, that power of Christ within you, to bring something through any situation that you're in, if you can become still enough and centered enough and united with God, that you can really weather any storm, because there is a part of you that's indestructible, that's always trying to break through, that's always trying to craft your life and eventually even an immortal body for you to become eternal in. So these attitudes of fear, these attitudes of vanity and control, they're not going to create any kind of meaningful existence. They never have and they never will. It's a lie. Okay, so this is what we have to be ready for, because there's going to be very hypnotic technologies introduced and easy ways, it seems like, to achieve certain things. And you have to have the sense and the knowledge to be able to come back to yourself and really understand the foundations of what is going to evolve you. And it's always going to be an internal process. It's never going to be outside of you. And I know we already know that, right? So I want to say something else about space colonization. We know that it's essentially a materialistic inversion of the death process. It's trying to understand heaven in a materialistic way, which is impossible. But there's so many different individuals that talk about there being ruins on Mars, or that the moon is hollow, or the moon has these structures, or these different moons of Jupiter or whatever have these structures, or there's even crafts going around and things like that. So how we understand these things is actually not through alienism or through automatically thinking that everything is like an extraterrestrial. That's just an extension of occult materialism, again. And how we actually understand the structures that may be found is through Atlantis. So Atlantis was actually a spacefaring civilization, believe it or not. And we are in a recapitulation of Atlantis now. And so if we really want to understand why the planetary spheres seem tampered with, or like something's going on, it's not going to be through the lens of these are aliens. It's going to be through the lens of Atlantis and through the lens of what would be called angels. And we have to start there. And then we can go to other things. But if we don't start in the right place, it's very easy with this intersection between spirituality, politics, science. If we don't start in the right place and start very, very early in our discussion, it's so easy to run away with really dysfunctional ideologies that may work in the material world, but the moment that somebody tries to engage with some of the ideologies like ancient aliens or whatever it is, the moment you try to engage with that spiritually, as though it is an idea that you could use in a spiritual process, it goes nowhere. So there's a difference between the exploration of the earth from a totally materialistic way, Okay, that's one way of looking at it. But if you want to engage spiritually with these topics, which is always where it ends up going, everything's always a multidimensional or ultra-terrestrial, or even with the technology, it eventually turns to spirituality without fail. But if we want to enter into it from a spiritual place, we have to use the correct language, that mystery language. We have to be able to go back and understand these earlier teachings properly through their mystery spiritual lens in which they're intended to be. And then we can integrate the modern stuff. We don't have to walk away from it, but we have to place it properly for it to actually become a functional system we can use spiritually, okay, in our mind, okay, we can enter into, right? So again, with the, it is an inversion to think that human beings need to leave the earth and go to another planet to become eternal, to live. It is a complete inversion, and it shows a severe lack of understanding of planetary evolution to think that a human being would need to leave a planet and go to another planet in order to survive, or planet hop, which is the Nazi origin myth, according to different individuals from these societies. The Nazi origin myth is one of planet hopping, of a civilization that repeatedly needs to go from planet to planet to planet, downgrading every single time in order to survive, to avoid cataclysms, okay? Cataclysms are a natural part of planetary evolution. They happen at the end of every epoch. They happen all the time on the planet. However, when a planet gets to the end of its overall cycle, the planet is actually reabsorbed into the sun. There is a solar union of the earth and the sun and the human being. And this is the rapture. This is what is known as the rapture. And this is when the human being basically receives an external impulse from the Christ, and they have their etheric body glorified. And that is the end of the planetary cycle. So we do it internally through the Christ impulse within us. And then there's an external solar event. Remember, Christ is the sun that creates the shift from material into etheric. Now, human beings need to be on the earth for that. The earth turns into an etheric body. In the Bible, this higher etheric form, this glorified etheric form, is called New Jupiter or New Jerusalem, okay? That's what it represents. In the New Age, it's called the 5D earth, okay? This is that teaching. It involves it involves the earth rising and rising and rising in consciousness for thousands of years, releasing materiality slowly. As I said, the human being and the earth work in tandem to do this. The sun gets hotter and more intense until it reabsorbs the earth and humanity, and then humanity exists in a different kind of existence. It is our return to spirit, and another cycle begins. There's a whole process of rearranging that occurs. All right, I've already lectured on this a few different times. So why is there now a movement and a group of people who are technologists, who are scientific materialists, who are trying to create this new path for humanity that involves leaving the earth, that directly removes humanity from their final stroke of creating the immortal body within them? It removes them from a very important process that even if you're not incarnated at the time, you will experience within the higher spheres itself. So what people from a materialist perspective, see as ingenuity. Let's go to Mars. We have to go to this different planet in order to survive. The Earth is going to one day be hit by an asteroid, or the Earth is one day going to be, the sun is going to eventually, whatever, change. This is not at all, this is the height of materialist ignorance. Okay, it is delusional. And it can only happen because humanity has sunk so low that we no longer understand the actual life of a planet and the sun. We no longer understand the spiritual and true material reality of our own existence. So I'm going to play a clip for you. And the clip is first going to be Wernher von Braun. And he is talking about, in this very early interview, in I think 1964, he is saying that the answer to humanity, humanity must, in order to preserve the light of consciousness, in order for humanity to not perish, humanity must go to Mars. We have to. Then you have Elon Musk saying, to preserve the light of consciousness, we must go to Mars. Now, to the materialist, again, this makes sense, because the materialist doesn't understand there's all of this spiritual and transformation going on. They don't understand the Earth is rising every single moment and releasing matter. The human body is releasing matter. It's spiritualizing little by little. The materialist doesn't understand that because they don't study it and they don't perceive it. So they're creating a false version of it. And that false version, if adhered to, will obviously drain and have money that could be going towards agriculture or go towards uplifting people. Now it's going to go to this dead pursuit that really probably is about something else that I'm not going to get into today. But this is not how the human species becomes eternal and survives. It's not through going to Mars or any other planet or through making the sun a Dyson sphere. This is maniacal. This is the height of human hubris. And we've got to be able to see that if we want to move forward as humanity in a healthy way and give the future generations a shot at actually developing as well. So I'm going to play this clip for you to show that the reason why going to Mars is not just that it's associated with Nazi esoterica and a belief system that was very powerful in the Nazi esoteric stream. It's really actually just that it is pointless. It's not how we evolve. It is completely negating the spiritual reality of the earth and of humanity, and it will deny the rapture. So any Christians that support this, I'm sorry, but you're not Christian at all. Okay, especially, but again, the idea of the rapture exists in the Eastern mysteries. It exists in every single mystery tradition, because all mystery teachings acknowledge the world begins as a spiritual body, like the human being begins, falls into matter, and then ascends upwards into a more immortal form. That is the structure of all mystery teachings. So why are we engaging with this weird thing where now man is playing God and disconnecting himself from the planet and from that process entirely? Okay, so here is this idea.
You don't think that we're going to have to escape to Mars one day?
No, I'd rather look at it the other way. I think somehow space flight for the first time gives mankind a chance to become immortal. In other words, once this Earth will no longer be able to support life, we can immigrate and go to other places that are better suited for the support of life.
place, at least in this part of the galaxy or in the Milky Way, where there is consciousness. According to the geological records, Earth's been around for about 4.5 billion years. It appears that consciousness is a very rare and precious thing, and we should take whatever steps we can to preserve the light of consciousness. And the window has been open. Only now, after 4.5 billion years, is that window open. There's a long time to wait, and it might not stay open for long. I'm pretty optimistic by nature, but there's some chance that window will not be open for long. And I think we should become a multi-planet civilization while that window is open.
Okay, so I'm sure a lot of you have heard that pitch before, but Wernher von Braun is saying, listen, this planet isn't going to support life. This planet is going to die. Okay, well, the reality is that life is metamorphosis. Life is transformation. We are beings on our planet. Everything about us is metamorphosis. Look at a seed, okay? The seed, when watered and placed in the earth, turns into a sprout, which turns into a plant. Life is metamorphosis. It is not stagnant. You are metamorphosis. So this idea that the earth is separate from that spiritual law is crazy. It's incorrect. Okay? The earth is that seed. You are that seed. And when humanity begins to rise and spiritualize into a higher form, it's not the death of the earth. It is us rising into an etheric form. And if you remember my video on the Mars line, there's sort of a separation of a higher and lower aspect of the earth, right? So there's a very precise transformation of the earth that occurs from a material presence over time to a spiritual presence. And that is not the destruction of the earth. That's the earth changing form. But if you're a materialist, you can't see that that is a shift in density. You can't see that that's a change from a seed to a plant. You just perceive it as the worst possible destruction. And that's what happens when there aren't any spiritual perceptions developed and you're trying to work on these really big topics, right? It's when there's a certain level of spiritual information already available, but without spiritual perception, you can't enter into it, right? So life is metamorphosis. Life is literally different states. It is law. It is the caterpillar in the cocoon, comes out a butterfly. Is the butterfly completely destroyed and can no longer support life because it's no longer a caterpillar? No. So this is the ideology that is just false. And I don't see any reason to humiliate anyone who believes this. I don't see any reason to be rude or whatever. It's just incorrect. And we should work to just assert the genuine, spiritual, scientific, healthy, organic reality, because that is life, okay? So we do have to begin to deal with this because these topics come on real fast, and we have to start now. So anybody who wants to clip any of my videos and share any of my videos that are public, go for it, as long as it's, of course, in the proper context. Or make your own, whatever it is. Because when we went through this exact same cycle in Atlantis, the reason why Atlantis fell is because we didn't move fast enough on exposing why this path doesn't work, why it doesn't lead to the evolution of humanity. And it just caught on, and it became too big too fast, and nobody was prepared for it. That's why Atlantis fell with the over-technologization and the Mars impulse, okay? So if we want to avoid that, we have to start now, we have to start early. And again, it's not about humiliating people, it's not about name-calling or anything like that. It's just about the very level-headed discussion about what is life, what is real immortality, how does the earth really evolve, which is spiritual science, which is actually understanding this, versus operating in a materialistic, literalist, externalist paradigm, which leads to death, objectively. Okay? So both of these inversions, space travel and space colonization as being necessary for the continuation of life. If we don't go to Mars, we're all going to perish. Transhumanism, the same kind of thing. This is how we live forever. All of these things characterize our idea of the future. It is every science fiction movie. We have been warned. This is something deep within our being. We've lived through it many different times in different epochs and even within different planetary spheres. We've lived through this. What are we going to do now? All of these things are predictable. And we have to choose the real path for humanity that leads to genuine evolution and eventually eternal life. Okay? So, I want to switch directions a little bit now. And I want to talk about actually the necessity of technology. So I have already lectured a lot on Ahriman. I've lectured on the electric apocalypse, which is a lecture that discusses how electricity and the radiation of the internet from different Starlink satellites or whatever it may be is changing the environment of the earth. And it's changing how we can sense our own spirit. So electricity, the electrification of the earth, all of this radiation from satellites, messing around with magnetism, all of these technologies that we have is changing the overall environment in which we operate to an unnatural one that actually interferes with our energetic body. You know, our etheric body is associated with electricity, right? And so our body is magnetic. Like, we can't just be bathing in the radiation from all these satellites all the time and electricity and think that it's not going to have an effect on our consciousness. So we have to kind of get a handle on this. But again, if you literally think that you don't have an etheric body or an astral body or spirit at all, you're totally for the electrification of the earth because it's exciting and it's more convenient, and it seems like if you don't understand spiritual evolution, well, we have to evolve technologically to get that same feeling of progress. It's an external progress, not an internal one though, and it is very costly to the human being that if we do not start to get a handle on this, babies will be born and they'll never be able to actually sense the essence of their own form, because the environment has become so artificial, so synthetic, that they can't find a place on the earth to actually feel that. Okay, so that's the danger. But I want to talk about the necessity of technology. And I've seen different people see what we are doing with technology, and so much technology is just unnecessary. Like, it's fun, but it's like, this isn't really, it's not really helping us necessarily. And I've seen people say that the answer to our hyper-technological era is to like regress into a tribal existence again, to regress into an agrarian culture of small little tribes living off of the land, and to just turn our back on the development of technology. And that's also misguided. Humanity is supposed to, as part of our development, actually create technologies. So we're supposed to essentially create these different technologies that are in harmony with the earth, in harmony with the human being, and in harmony with the sun and the cosmos. So we're actually meant to create technology, but the technology is designed to interface properly with the human being and the world around us. And what we're seeing now are technologies that could potentially be tweaked to do that. But when certain technologies, like negative technologies or zero-point energy technologies, certain things that break into the etheric, when those are introduced too soon, it is immoral because human consciousness is not prepared for it, and it ends up creating a kind of hive mind effect. Essentially, human beings won't be able to sense their own higher self because of the interference specifically of these kinds of technologies. So we can go down that path, which is the immoral introduction of technologies before humanity is ready, which makes it very difficult for humanity, especially young people. Or we can develop technology properly, okay? So the real healthy development of technology is actually related to the mineral kingdom. You're going to get a little hint of this from the different mystical visions of Atlantis, especially Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce describes a kind of technology that's made out of crystal, and he calls it the two-eye stone or the fire stone. I highly recommend going to Dark Journalist's channel and watching every single Cayce Atlantis video that he's done. There's no one better on that topic than him. So if you want more information on that, definitely go and check Dark Journalist out. But essentially there was a kind of very advanced technology in which we knew that it interfaced with our energy body and our consciousness. And it was, for a time, it was used properly, and it was a great advancement for humanity. Okay? But when darker forces got a hold of that, they began to accelerate things. They began to use that technology to control human consciousness. They began to use that technology to have weapons with, to develop weapons with. And so as we are in our epoch and we're evolving, we have to move through that recapitulation of technology being used first to control humanity and make weapons out of. Does anybody really know what's on these satellites up there? How much of that is really being watched? I mean, the issue with a lot of this technology stuff too, even from the perspective of like the Second Amendment or whatever, is that we just don't have the legislation to protect ourselves from the kinds of things these technologies do. It's easy to say that you're for the Constitution and that you're for humanity when we don't even have the legislation to prevent you from doing whatever you possibly could be doing with the level of advancement that these different groups have. So we are moving into a time where we have to confront the same issue that we did in Atlantis, which is using technology as a way to control people, control consciousness, and as a weapon against humanity for control. That's our destiny. We have to move through that. But technology is actually something that humanity has to develop to evolve. So if we were to just stay in like a tribal agrarian type situation, we wouldn't be rising the mineral kingdom to where it should be, because we are supposed to develop consciously technology so that we can understand our internal processes externally. But there's a conscious way to do that that actually uplifts the mineral kingdom through its direct involvement, specifically through the crystal components of technology. and some other metals and things that are also part of the mineral kingdom. So a big part of us developing technology is actually to advance the kingdoms beneath us by externalizing internal processes into technology. And that's also partly how we know ourselves. And it actually advances us and connects us a great deal. And developing technology consciously is part of our destiny. It doesn't take anything away from us. It actually just becomes kind of part of us, but not in this weird, sick way that we're seeing with like transhumanism and like the weird hive mind. Put the chip in your brain and then turn the satellites on, and it's like the hive mind. That's a materialist inversion. When humanity is ready and prepared, the technology can actually be incredibly powerful and affirming and allows for very deep spiritual development and validations. So the development of technology is actually important for humanity. And part of it is about raising and liberating the mineral kingdom. Okay, that's what technology does when we establish it correctly. All right. Immoral development will actually entrap the mineral kingdom in a destructive degenerative cycle, and it will bind humanity to the mineral kingdom rather than liberate it. And it's so funny because on Twitter, this really incredible Twitter account called Esoteric Christian was mentioning how some of the memes going around at the election were of some kind of video game where this person gets trapped in a crystal and they're like, get me out of here. And it's like, this is actually very deep in our memory, which is that we are here in part to liberate and serve the kingdoms of life beneath us, especially the mineral kingdom. And we can either liberate it through the conscious development of technology, right? Or we can completely trap ourselves and bind ourselves with the mineral kingdom through the inversion of that process, through trying to control, right? This is like when you want to merge with a machine or something like that. That binds you to the mineral kingdom. That's not transcending the mineral kingdom. Okay? That's binding you to, that's trapping you in the crystal. That's binding you to the material world, to the mineral kingdom, and actually lowering your station into a path of devolution that you're going to have to deal with potentially in further incarnations as to why you devolved rather than evolved. Okay? So it creates a divergent life wave, is what I'm trying to say. So again, it's not that we can't use technology. Not at all. But technology is not the replacement for, spiritual development. I hear over and over again this, this pitch from often people connected to Elon, where it's like, there's the good chip, there's the good transhumanism, there's the good chips that you can have in your brain and in your eyes, and there's the bad ones. Listen, if you're going to be chipping yourself, okay, and having these, to have like false clairvoyance or whatever it is, or, even some regenerative stuff, as long as there's those satellites that are beaming down all this radiation on you and our world is becoming more and more electrified, that ain't going to be the same environment for you. If you want to have chips or kind of regenerative technologies without all of the satellites, without all of the electrification of the earth, that's a different story. But it is the combination of having these chips, Neuralink chips or whatever it is, always with the chips. It's the combination of having the chips in your body, the mark of the beast from Revelation, and then having the electrification of the earth, having all of this weird magnetic stuff, all of the radiation. It's that with the fact that the environment we're living in is now synthetic. It's the combination of all these things. It's not just the chip. It's that with that, There is the complete changing of our environment to a synthetic one that is basically just electrification and radiation that makes it so you may be able to see again or whatever, but now you're hooked up into this synthetic 8th sphere. Okay? So there's the good chips, there's the bad chips. No, if you're getting a chip in your brain or in your eye or something, and you're literally just tuning yourself like an antenna to the 8th sphere, right? So it's not just the chips, it's the synthetic environment. And for that, there's the work of Elena Freeland, right? And so it's a system that is the beast system, which is the electrification of the earth, all the satellites rating down 5G and 10G or whatever it is. And then it's you having a hyperconductive chip in your body. You have now a machine part basically, and the electricity in your body changes to an inorganic kind, which has certain essences in it that are from the subnatural world. And you become part of that over time. Okay, so this is the reality. That's the problem with that stuff as well. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit. I'm probably going to be another half an hour or so. And if you're having any questions, don't forget that I will be going for extra time on my members website and taking questions there. I do a live Q&A there also every 2 weeks or so, and we go for 4 hours. We cover everything. There's also probably like 500 hours of exclusive content over there in the form of my live Q&As. So if you enjoy this, if you want to go deeper into immortality, Mars, anything spiritual or anything, go over there if you want. And that allows me to continue to do these free lectures and just keep the lights on over here. So if you are enjoying this, do consider being a member there, as it allows me to do all of my free work. Okay, so now we're going to get into this next chapter in this discussion, which is that right now, again, we have this opportunity to evolve, and it could go very well if we include spiritual reality in our evolution, or it could go horribly wrong if we try to just approach our future from a completely materialist lens. So we have to get real for 1 second. So this is not a political conversation. I'm speaking about spiritual impulses and their effect on humanity. Okay, so there are people in the world and within the Trump administration and other political streams as well that want to use technology to enslave humanity for power. Okay? Anyone who doesn't acknowledge that these kinds of technocrats exist and that they are materialists and they are seeking to enrich and empower themselves through a technological revolution is lying to themselves, or they're trapped in a tribal consciousness, or you're not a serious person. Okay? We cannot view these different political figures as in a tribal way and think that everything that the Trump administration does is golden, that there's no forces behind that administration that could be looking to usurp. Okay? The same thing with the political left. The same thing with any political organization or any group. We have to view it soberly. If we want to be taken seriously, we got to move out of tribal consciousness. Okay? So that also allows us to continually hold leadership accountable to get the best out of it. The more active we are, the more we hold leaders accountable, the best we get out of them. The more that we rest on our laurels and start to think that people are perfect or campaigns are perfect is when we're in real trouble, and we will have problems, okay? So there was something that, well, first of all, I think there's a few dangers down the line. And I think we have to discuss them now, because especially when we're dealing with things from a spiritual perspective, like prophecy or spiritual science coming into the world, it can take a while for that kind of energy and that kind of information to sink in. So the earlier that we discuss it, the better it actually is, because it can take a while for it to percolate and for us to understand. Okay, that's why we're getting on it right now. So there's something that people are going to start saying over and over again, which is that we're going to go through basically like an American rebirth, or rebirth in the world led by America, an American Renaissance, or the new America. Okay, now this is something that kind of is destiny. We do need to evolve. We do need to develop consciously technology. We do need to heal the planet. We do need to move into more of a healthy existence and really put behind us a lot of the weird tyrannical crap we've been going through, especially in the last 4 years. That is true. We do need that. But there's going to be a false version of this that includes everything that I've been talking to you about on the dark side. And there's going to be sort of this back and forth between, the political right and left, where there's so much drama going on, or potentially disasters, or even war, where we're so thrown off balance because of the drama between these two deep states, or these two different political parties, or different aspects. I do acknowledge that one is better than the other for sure, but we can't get so caught up in the mundane level of the world that we allow certain legislation to be passed that is too soft on things like Starlink or things like different technologies, and having our rights removed. Okay, because that's one of the challenges that we're going to come across, is that we're not going to legislate properly for this hyper-technological age that we're coming into. And once you get too deep in that, again, it's very hard to get out of, okay? So if there's disasters, or there's, like the fear of war, we can't allow that to lead to kind of rushed changes and rollouts of technology to keep us safe. And new laws proposed that limit freedom and increase technology. That's where we're really at. Because whenever someone's trying to control or do something, it's always under these emergency powers, right? So we have to be very careful of that. And many people within, say the Trump administration, they may not even realize that it's going on. That's why we just have to talk about it. A lot of people may not even see the spiritual side of things, see the problems with having a technological subversion go on. They may not even understand it, okay? It's not always malicious, right? And we have to also really make sure that leadership is as moral as possible, and that people are spiritual. Because the pattern is that if leaders are not spiritual to some degree, whatever that is, then what ends up happening is usually the individual becomes God and society is lowered. Okay, so we need that moral impulse, and we need a spiritual impulse to be there in leadership, right? So there was a while back this idea of this new America, this American Renaissance. And it's been floated around a little bit by the Trump campaign, which does have a lot of technocratic backing. Again, this is not, I want to be very clear, this is just a sober, mature conversation about some of the factors behind the potential administration, right? This is not a political good or bad thing. This is just soberly looking at down the barrel of something that's potentially coming, so we can confront it. So there was this this pitch that has been coming up again and again, especially through the Trump administration, which is this idea of freedom cities. Okay, and the freedom cities, according to the Trump team, are basically going to be completely new cities. And they're not going to it's not like they're going to go into like Detroit or another city that's had a difficult time. They want to go and they want to take a small percentage of national parks. And they want to create basically a whole new prototype of city. And this is supposed to be a very futuristic kind of new American city. Okay. Now, I don't know for sure, but I think we've got to keep our eye on that, because I think that the Freedom City idea could potentially be a smart city. It could be a great idea. Okay. It could be brilliant. All I'm saying is that we need to proceed with caution, that we're not going into a situation where there are these 7 or 8 freedom cities in America that become hyper technologically advanced. Whenever there's technological advancement, also know that that's high surveillance. Okay, so technology right now is synonymous with surveillance. Of course it is. So we have to direct this properly, because we don't want these freedom cities to appear, and that could be very Orwellian. We don't want these freedom cities to appear and have them be this massive technological prototype. And then if you don't go along with that, the other cities in America could just fall by the wayside, if that makes sense. We don't want to have these two distinct paths where one is hyper-technological development from these prototypes, and then the other ones are sort of no technology at all, and that fall to the wayside, creating this distinct divide. I think that's something that we need to be careful about. Okay? It's just something that we have to watch. So sort of like the starving of cities that reject technology, and then the increased electrification of the earth and the increased hyper-technologically advanced cities that are willing to go deeper and deeper into that unchecked paradigm. Okay, so that's the dystopia we have to look out for. So we have to be very vigilant that, you know, this doesn't come to pass. Okay. All right. So this is another thing. That is part of prophecy. It's something that I've seen in the future that I also think that we need to be careful of, which is the rise of Barron Trump. So I think that in the future, especially in the next 10 years, we are going to see a lot of grooming, especially for young men, but women as well, to sort of see Barron Trump as a special incarnation, or a kind of genius, a kind of special political savant, a special personality, the incarnation of a great personality. And I think that people are already starting to be groomed slowly to think that, the way that Barron is being spoken about, the way that he is photographed often. I think that there's something else behind that we're not going to get into today, but I think we need to be very cautious of this, okay? Now, usually if somebody is going to take some kind of leadership and they want to make that leadership special, they want to glorify this leader with sort of a supernatural force, they try to sort of apply a certain origin myth to them, like it's been predicted, right? And I think that could actually be connected to the time travel book that's associated with him, Barron Trump and his Adventures Underground. and these different books that have come forth that are allegedly from the 1800s. Now, I'm not trying to say that this is 100%. I'm just saying this is something that I have seen as problematic, okay? And the little Baron Trump it's like a Venus myth. It is a Persephone myth. It's an Alice in Wonderland myth, which is which suggests the descension of a great personality to the earth. So when you see the Persephone myth, when you see the Alice in Wonderland mythology, when you see Inanna in the Sumerian mythology, when you even see in the Sumerian mythology the descent of even males into the earth, that is actually the descent of a being from heaven to the earth. So it's a way of talking about divine right. It's using the metaphors of divine right by having a god king go underground. The earth is underground relative to Venus. Remember, the spheres are like this, right? That's heaven. The heaven is the higher spheres which surround the earth in a higher dimension. So when you have someone descending underground, metaphorically, that is coming to the earth. That's what that means. And that's like when you have a high incarnation of an archangel or a Buddha or a bodhisattva, they are descending into the earth. That's how we've always seen that. That's how we've mythologized it. That's why Persephone gets pulled into the earth, why Alice gets pulled into the earth. That's the Venus initiate. That's Mary. That's the high personality of that figure coming to the earth, okay? So I think the myth that is being talked about with Baron Trump is problematic because you could say that mythologically he is being set up to be a very important figure, okay? And in my opinion, there are some red flags around this. We need to be careful with this. I'm not trying to rain on anybody's parade. I just know that with these kinds of topics, they have to be talked about immediately. We can't wait around until things start to get a little rotten in Denmark to talk about these kinds of things. They need to be talked about immediately because they need to percolate, they need to develop meaning or not. All right? It doesn't mean that we can't get the best out of the Trump administration. It just means that whatever challenges that come along our way, we have to potentially be ready for them and reject what is not good for us. And obviously, the other thing too is that with this new America, this new Renaissance, it really should be driven by spirituality, driven by this deeper desire to spiritually evolve. But what this false new America is this release of all of these different hidden technologies. And it's just basically a lot of technologies that have been hidden by private corporations that have been used for decades by these different people who have had them. They often say they're reverse engineered from aliens, but that is we've had it since Atlantis. You know, the cataclysms didn't destroy our knowledge of this. Mystery schools and certain societies have kept this knowledge and redeveloped it. It's not alien, right? We can deal with alien stuff all we want, but it has to be properly attributed. You know, it's from Atlantis, you know. And so this idea of new America, this new Renaissance, there's going to be a deep desire for certain people to basically drop all of these technologies, create a technological revolution in medicine and in transportation and all this kind of stuff. And it's too focused on seducing people into that false path we're talking about, okay? So a real Renaissance requires spiritual awakening. There is no such thing as rebirth unless the spirit becomes stronger and more powerful in the world. So we are on the precipice potentially of a false awakening. And this is why we also see in politics, we suddenly see this UFO hearing on November 13th. This is the way that these private companies who have this technology and have had it for decades are now trying to break back in after having been developing it and using it amongst themselves. They're now trying to break back into society, and they want to say that it's alien for various different reasons. But it's really about creating this technological revolution in America that's called the New Renaissance. It's supposed to liberate us. We have to be very careful about this because, again, if there's true liberation, it has to involve Christ. It has to involve God. God is the process and the essence within us that causes all life to emerge. So we cannot be seduced by this new America, this American Renaissance, which is a bunch of technologies that promise eternal life, that promise all these kinds of things, but are inversions of real spiritual progress. We have to direct this properly. Okay? So there is the criticisms and warnings about the future, which is necessary. That is the inversions that we have to be careful of. So, the materialist understands deep within their being that achieving immortality is the goal of the human being. However, the materialist seeks to achieve this externally and projects spiritual processes into the material world, into technologies and scientific processes, creating false inversions. These inversions fragment and ultimately destroy human consciousness, drawing it into a lesser divergent path. Your etheric body is real. Your astral body is real. Electricity is an interface for that. Magnetism is an interface for that. Radiation from these different devices affects our spiritual bodies. Okay? Humanity will be challenged with a false version of evolution under the guise of a new America. Okay? A renaissance, a new world. After years of tyranny, we will be vulnerable to blindly accepting a path that is not part of the natural earth evolution. This false version of New America will not lead humanity to a higher condition, but rather is designed to seduce and draw humanity away from the earth and its natural rhythms and away from the sun. Okay? The selling point of this new culture is advanced technology in various fields, from transportation to currency to the medical field. Many scientific discoveries that are not actually in harmony with the spiritual world. Keep in mind that many elite groups, including those bringing it forth, have been using it amongst themselves for decades and have chosen this time to bring it forward. It is planned. Okay, it's not random. We must be diligent in avoiding tribalism. Both the current political left and right have dark aspects behind them. Okay? I've mentioned this before. The political left is associated with what is called Old Venus and the Luciferic impulse. It leads into all kinds of stuff, generally to do with sexuality. And I've already mentioned it before, but study the fall of Lemuria, and that is the political left. The political right is Mars. It is the masculine polarity. The political left is the feminine. That's why we had this push for matriarchy, a return to matriarchy, communalism, emotionality, women, okay? The political right is Mars. And it has the same degree, potentially, of darkness, but in the opposite way. We need to understand this. It is necessary that Mars overtakes Venus, old Venus, okay? That is how Atlantis sprung, was from the positive aspects of Mars, right? But Mars degenerates as well, and from Mars, the mercurial impulse arises. This is the cosmic planetary influence behind society. There are planetary rulers to every transition. There's a rotten aspect and a risen aspect. So the Mars impulse rules a political right, and there are dangers with that, but from the Mars impulse will split, and the Mercury impulse, which is also the Michael or the Michaelic impulse, will rise. So over time, over the next several years, we will have to confront the fallen Mars impulse, which is hyper-technological, technocratic, transhumanism, space colonization. We have to deal with all of these ideas. But right now, the Mars forces and the Mercurial Michael forces are bound in one. That's why there's so much positivity about it. But over time, it will distill, and Mercury will arise, and fallen Mars will reveal itself. That is the progression of worlds upon the Earth. That is the planetary rulership of Lemuria, Atlantis, and our era. That's how that is determined in occult science. Those are the influences. Okay? So we can see that occurring now, and that gives us that higher vision to maneuver this properly. Okay? So right now, again, the Mars forces merge with that higher mercurial force, and the spiritual push to develop technology properly, to keep spirituality in mind. That's what separates out the lower fallen Mars impulse that really has no intention of doing anything for the betterment of society. It's all about control. It's all about power. That will have to separate from the mercurial impulse, which is also the Michael impulse. And Michael will eventually overtake that. But there's a lot in between that, and that can go a lot of different ways, and we have to be active participants, because it may be destiny for Michael to slay the dragon, but we can go into that slaying our own dragons as well and causing incredible advancements, or we can go kicking and screaming, having transformed nothing and being really victims. So these are the forces that we're dealing with, and so we have to be diligent to avoid tribalism. Both the current political left and right have dark aspects behind them. Of course they do. This is why people didn't want to vote. This is why people are have PTSD when it comes to trusting people, whether it be media figures or politics. I mean, people have been destroyed psychologically. Their trust for humanity by how crooked politics has become. So, you know, it hasn't been very great. So both sides we're not free of the dark influence. We're not free of corruption. We are seeing one sort of aspect of the deep state overtake another, which is destiny, right? But we still have a lot of work to do. We still have to be vigilant. Doesn't mean that you can't celebrate. It doesn't mean that you can't enjoy, but you can't fall into tribalism. You can't fall into hero worship. You can't fall into these old, human patterns where we need saviors. We are the people who are the saviors, okay? So each side really also seeks a different kind of control and has a different kind of evil behind them, really. They're not the same, which is why they're quite happy to take each other out and expose each other, because they actually have a different kind of darkness behind them, right? So that said, there are also forces in governance now, and there are also different leaders that work for the actual evolution of humanity. There are many thought leaders. I see them on social media all the time. There are politicians. There are people out there who are for the actual evolution of humanity, and that have the ability to lead humanity properly through this process. They are mixed in with everything going on. And we have to do our best to empower those people, to support them, to promote them, to give them a voice. Okay, so it's not just all bad. It's not just all corruption. There are good people mixed in there too that understand this, and that's why we have to follow them, support them, make their voices louder, and come to it from this higher perspective rather than being caught in just the economy or just national defense or just the schools. Or there's a lower level, which is not lower as in lesser, but there's a materialist level to things. And then there is the spiritual impulses behind them and the actual evolutionary impulses we need to bring into all those things. So we need to begin operating from there. That's what is necessary for us to evolve. All right, so we're going to go into one more small thing about the Christ and the Christ impulse in humanity. And then I'm going to head over to my website where I will be taking audience questions from my members. Okay, so you cannot talk about the establishment of the immortal body or the diamond body or the resurrection body or the glorified phantom eternality without talking about the Christ. The Christ being is the reason why we actually have the impulse within our heart to evolve at all. And there's a process on the planet where Earth and humanity has slowly over time absorbed and integrated the Christ essence basically into us, little by little. Okay, and it really entered us in its final stage into the material world through the crucifixion, through Jesus, when the blood of Christ went into the soil. This is not a lecture on the crucifixion or resurrection, but that is the moment that the Christ being entered into humanity and was no longer outside of humanity, but now within humanity as an actual force that leads to the transubstantiation of your body to a higher body. That's the mystery in a nutshell. So Christ has always existed, again, in many of these traditions, but it went by a different name. Usually it's, the mystery of Osiris and Horus. It is the Great Spirit in Native American culture. It's the Christos. From a spiritual scientific perspective, we can see the Christ as the great macrocosmic entity that we all actually exist within. He's the highest solar being. Okay, that is the Christ. And anytime a part of you awakens, a part of you heals, it is the Christ force within you that has caused that transubstantiation. So it's not just like source. It's not just like some vague term. It's actually Christ. But more importantly than even using the word Christ, you have to understand it's the macrocosmic entity and it's the sun entity. So in order to actually properly evolve ourselves, we have to understand who these higher beings are that actually gave us the abilities to change ourselves, who actually sacrificed themselves for us to have a certain essence within us, have poured themselves into us. We can't understand our evolution without understanding initiation in the spiritual hierarchies. It's just eventually we have to become conscious of all these things that have happened, like the meaning of the crucifixion, like what creates a Buddha, like all of this initiation science, especially the mystery of Golgotha and the crucifixion. These are things we have to understand because they have changed us. They've changed our form and they've changed the planet. So we don't really get to know ourselves, which is how we evolve, unless we know them and we know what those mysteries are. Otherwise, we're just basically gliding around in total unconsciousness as to what the specific forces actually are and why. That's not really awakening. That's just creating a fantasy about what you want it to be and just crossing your fingers and hoping that you transform. We need that precision today to be consciously growing and developing our immortal body. So there is something that's very important for our time. Remember how I said that it was decided by the church fathers who are in the Christ stream. And this is going back to the spiritual people and masters and angelic powers that actually prepared the world for Christ, prepared Jesus to receive the Christ, and are still involved in the development of the Christ stream, especially through Michael in this time, that is preparing humanity to achieve immortality, for us to have our own resurrection, right? That's the rapture. So the same forces that prepared the world for Christ in earlier periods, who prepared Jesus, this is the Essene to prepare, those same beings, those same people, those same masters are engaged with us right now on the next level of us integrating the Christ impulse. Okay, and so the church fathers and spiritual forces in the Christ impulse, they knew that certain doctrines had to be removed and certain emphases had to be put on. One was reincarnation was removed, even though in esoteric Christianity it stayed. In many deeply Christian esoteric communities that stayed, but in dogmatic Christianity it was left behind. So there's something else that was left a little bit not talked about, you could say. And we do need to talk about it now because we do need to begin the preparation psychologically for it, okay? So there is the internal Christ impulse, which I just spoke about, which is centered around how every single human being, it doesn't matter whether you're white or black or what color you are. It doesn't matter what gender you are, what sexuality you are. I don't care. All the labels, all the pronouns, it doesn't matter. Okay? Christ is within you. Whatever's going on in your external form, Christ is within your heart. And Christ is the transformative essence that is there right now for you to go beyond this world and for you to become embodied as well, for you to truly become who you are, for you to actually become your higher self, essentially, using New Age terms. For you to become fully embodied. The Christ force is within you. It's gone by many names, but it's within you. Okay? And it's that internal impulse that creates eternality by integrating all of your spiritual bodies into an eternal body, which is the vehicle of supreme healing and realization and transcendence of the material world. That's yours. You have that within you. That's you. As long as we can understand it and talk about it and feel it, we can do that. It's there. There were earlier times in humanity when the Christ impulse was not precisely in the earth yet, was not within the human being. We had to project outside of ourselves through ceremony, through drugs, through ecstatic states. We had to project outside of ourselves to experience our higher self, to experience the Christ. But Christ is now within us. It's now within the earth. He was always around. But the method of connecting was different, and the transformation and spiritualization process is available to us now. All right? That is the internal Christ impulse. There's also going to come a time, because part of this lecture is not just on the mechanics of immortality, it is about prophecy. It's about understanding the challenges we face in the future, preparing ourselves for them, and orienting ourselves to get in the best position, okay? There's one more thing that we have to understand about the future and prepare for and understand, which is that there is going to be the experience of the Christ impulse externally. And this is going to come through the sun. Okay, this is going to happen at a certain time in earthly development in the future, where the earth will basically be absorbed into the sun through a solar event. Now, again, to somebody who does not understand metamorphosis and transformation, they look at that and they think, oh my God, we better get off planet, right? Or oh my God, this is horrible, you know? But that event happens only because the earth and humanity have reached a certain stage within themselves, where basically the Christ, because Christ is the highest solar entity, takes them back, takes them home. So it, on the outside, it is a solar flare, or it's a solar event. But the experience of it is that your material form is basically the last little bit of it we'll have at that point is eviscerated, and we will live in an etheric body. And the earth will also at the same moment be transformed into an etheric body as well. This is called the rapture. And it becomes a central teaching in Christianity because, again, humanity was finally ready for it by that time. But it exists as well in earlier mystery teachings because they understood, even going back into the ancient Indian traditions, they were very aware that the earth began as a spiritual form, materialized, and then returns to spirit. They understood in those earlier traditions what the sun was, that the great sun being. They understood the Christ in the ancient Indian tradition. They just called it something different. And they actually knew of this process. It's just we weren't close enough to it yet to start forming these different ideas and preparing for it. Okay? And it is the Michael force in society that really crystallizes and prepares humanity for that. Michael being the solar archangel. And so we are to use the Michael forces now to prepare for that event, which Michael also represents the other aspect of resurrection and waking up to the spiritual world and the spiritual plane and the plurality of things, the cosmos, right? So I'm going to read to you again from The Fourth Mystery by C.G. Harrison. And I think this is a phenomenal book to have because there's lots of little secrets and mysteries revealed in it. So this is actually C.G. Harrison's comments on basically St. Paul. And here we go. Behold, I shew you a mystery. We shall not all die, but we shall be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. A time will certainly come, sooner perhaps than is generally supposed, when owing to an astronomical catastrophe, the earth will become incandescent vapor, and every living thing on it will suddenly exchange its material for an etheric body. So suddenly that it will take some time to get used to the difference. But they will know they are being judged, and even judging themselves, for thoughts and deeds committed in the body. And many will learn for the first time what righteousness or justice is, and what it implies when translated into terms of conduct. So what is being said here? What do you think is being said here? So this is basically describing the rapture, or it's describing this solar event or an astronomical catastrophe, as he calls it. And what ends up happening is that the material body, the material form, ends up being turned into incandescent vapor. That's what it looks like clairvoyantly when you observe this. And that material body that we have at this time will exchange its substance for etheric substance. So it's a transformation of the material to the etheric through the Son, through the Christ, but now it's an external impulse. And that external Christ impulse that will cause our material form to become an etheric form is going to work upon you because you already have the Christ impulse within you. So you have the Christ impulse within you, within your heart, that was delivered at the turning point in time, or the crucifixion, right? That was when the great solar being's blood poured into the soil through Jesus. So now moving forward, we have this Christ impulse internally. So now we're going to receive it as an external impulse, and it is going to grab on to that internal Christ impulse we have. And that's what creates the transformation of the body into an etheric body. So let me read that one more time, because I think that C.G. Harrison does such a good job in this book. And I want to read it one more time so that we can really, really take it in. Behold, I shew you a mystery. We all shall not die, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. A time will certainly come, sooner perhaps than is generally supposed, when owing to an astronomical catastrophe, the earth will become incandescent vapor, and every living thing on it suddenly exchange its material for an etheric body. So suddenly that it will take some time to get used to the difference. But they will know they are being judged, and even judging themselves, for thoughts and deeds committed in the body. And many will learn for the first time what righteousness or justice is, and what it implies when translated into terms of conduct. So, really powerful paragraph there, which is page 83 and 84 for those of you who want to dive into the fourth mystery and read that yourself. But this is the mystery of birth and death, which is what we're talking about today. We're talking about the fourth mystery today, because the birth and death is also immortality, the real secrets of immortality, which is spiritual. So thank you guys so much for sticking with me. I know this was a very intense lecture today. Let's finish on the Christ, because when we understand the Christ and we understand the Son and the mysteries of that, then we can begin to kind of also grasp immortality. So the Son is a living being called the Christ. The Christ forces emerge from the Sun and rule the earth and all planets in our system. The Christ being, or the Sun, also has within itself the Christ being, or the Sun, also has within itself the spiritual hierarchies and spiritual beings and us, just like how we have different elementals and organisms that live within our body. We also live within the body of Christ. We live within the body of the great solar being. First, humanity receives the Christ internally. Then there is a solar event where humanity is received into the Christ externally. This brings Earth and humanity into an etheric form. So I hope that through our talk today, we have a strong enough foundation to move forward with clarity. And once we know what eternality and immortality really is, the force within us that creates it, how it's been studied and how that mystery has been carried on in even prior traditions, the body being called the Vajra body or the diamond body, or how it's existed eternally, like in every teaching that we've had. This has been the foundation of it. And it's such a part of us, again, that we know that that's our destiny. And that not only are we going to become a glorified etheric form, but we're evolving with the earth and the sun. And so anytime that you start to hear about different ways of progressing through these bizarre technologies or like space colonization, there is the foundation now to understand how real progress occurs in the human being. And it's not externally, it's not through space colonization. We do not need to survive by dominating other planets and thinking that we're going to create life on them. And again, actually, the Mars thing goes a lot deeper than that. It's actually about other things as well, which we'll get into much later, especially as the Mars narrative progresses. We will follow that right along, and we will have the sobering conversations about that too. So I hope that this can be some kind of foundation to move forward, because we do have some challenging periods coming. And the only way that we can make it through that is through actually understanding how we spiritually evolve consciously, okay? How we become eternal beings, what eternality really is, and how we truly evolve. So thank you all for joining me today. I'm now going to head over to my private website. If you have a question, you still have some time to sign up, and I will be doing questions for probably a while over there on this topic. So thank you so much.